The question tonight is, should the United States pay reparations for slavery? It's a question that harkens to the earliest days of the American experience. The first 20 Africans were sold into slavery at Jamestown, Virginia in 1620. By the time slavery was abolished at the end of the Civil War, 25 million black people had lived and died in slavery. The separation of the races in schools, housing, employment, even in buses and restaurants would continue in much of the country for another century. Tonight we debate not whether the colossal human indignity of slavery and segregation left African Americans disadvantaged. The statistics on education, crime, income disparity, single parenthood, and life expectancy answer that question with definitive clarity. Rather, the question is whether that indignity has created an entitlement, a legal, political, or moral cause of action on behalf of black people against society as a whole. Is there a monetary value to be determined? Who are the appropriate beneficiaries and who should pay the damage? Should the payment be to individuals or groups in the form of cash or remedial programs? And would it truly settle the debt, ending other programs that benefit blacks disproportionately? Would it end those programs once and for all? Tonight we have debaters equipped by knowledge and experience to answer these questions, or at least address them. And the first debater for the negative side of tonight's proposition is Professor Glenn Loury.
Thank you. I rise to address the question, should the U.S. pay reparations for slavery? I'm going to argue in the negative on that question. I take no pleasure in doing so. Would that I would be somewhere else tonight than here before you arguing the negative of this question. I am not without sympathy for the arguments that just have been presented. I mean, how could it be otherwise? I am a descendant of slaves. I recognize that we have a past that needs to be reckoned with. But the payment of reparations to African Americans for the wrongs of that past is the wrong way to reckon with it. I say that for three reasons. It's bad social ethics. Bad social ethics. It is bad racial politics. Bad racial politics. And it averts our attention from the most profound issues with which, if we do not reckon, we're never going to put that past behind us. Now, let's deal with the social ethics. The tort law model that is implicit in the reparations claim. Party A injures Party B. Party B sues Party A. Party A pays Party B. Is the wrong model for thinking about this problem. If I was talking about somebody who carelessly let their automobile roll down the garage driveway and run into the automobile of someone else, then we're talking let's get paid. That is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the desecration of the most important ideals that this country has advanced. I'm talking about a nation founded on the notion that all men are created equal and endowed, so forth and so on, that nevertheless countenance the institution of traffic in human chattel. That is a monumental crime, the magnitude of which is diminished into something picayune by saying that it's about money. It is not about money. What it's about is whether or not we are going to rise and be the people whom we have always proclaimed ourselves to be. And let me tell you, folks, you cannot put a price tag on that. The African-American family, more than 60% of black children are born out of wedlock. That has got something to do with the fact that men and women could be ripped from the moorings of their familial bond and sold away as if they were property, as if they were horses, under the institution of slavery. That's not a small thing. It's a big thing. You want me to monetize that? $10,000 a head times 30 million people, that's $300 billion, and then we're done with it? No, not on my watch. It's serious business, as my erstwhile worthy opponent, has said, it is serious business, too serious to be put down on somebody's paycheck. It's bad social ethics. Us versus them. They got hurt, we're going to pay them. This is not about black people and white people, human beings. This is about human beings. This is about America. I don't want a contested, legalized, us-them reduction of this problem. I want us to understand that the stakes here are stakes for everybody. We're all on the same side. It's bad social ethics. It is bad racial politics. It is bad racial politics. I am so tired of the politics of symbolism substituting for a substantive building of progressive coalitions in African American political experience that I do not know what to do. The nation is moving forward. We are a forward-looking people. 30 million immigrants come to our shores since 1965. They and their children are a part of the national story, too. How can we address the problems that continue to plague us, that derive from this outrageous history, without real political coalitions prepared to enact into law the myriad statutes that will be necessary with respect to health care, with respect to education, with respect to housing, with respect to doing something about the blight of our inner cities? How are those laws actually going to be passed unless majorities can be formed that are prepared to affirm them? Those majorities need to be given a narrative, a story, an account of what we are about. And I fear that the reparations construction is woefully inadequate to provide such an account. We need a common narrative of national obligation. That's the only way that black education is going to improve. That's the only way that the quality of life for poor black children in inner cities is going to be made better. A common narrative onto which at least 51% of the electorate is prepared to sign about national obligation. You cannot get there from here with a reparations argument. It's bad politics. It is a diversion from the real issues. As I said, we need political coalition. As I have said, we need to garner the support of new Americans who simply can't buy into this old argument as theirs. But most importantly, we need to recognize that even if African Americans were to prevail in the reparations claim, even if we were to get paid, even if we were to get the check, we could still lose. Consider the American who sits in the suburbs somewhere who is approached with the problems of 1.2 million black young men under lock and key on a given day, and on the day after reparations checks have gone out saying, oh yeah, well, you people have been paid. Consider the rural American resident who is approached with the problem of life expectancy of African Americans 10 years shorter than that of white Americans for all manner of reasons having to do both with the way in which health care is delivered and the general factors of our society that affect the quality of life of people of color. And that person says, yes, interesting point, but you know what? You Negroes have been paid. Consider the person, perhaps a recent citizen to the country, who is informed about the fact that African American 17-year-olds in this country read and compute at the level of white American 13-year-olds, a 4-year gap in educational accomplishment by the time they're 17, and that person says, it's an interesting point, but you know what? Those checks just went out. You people have been paid. What I'm saying to you, ladies and gentlemen, and the reason that I urge you to support me, is that precisely because this is a serious matter, precisely because the possibility that our country will not live up to its most cherished ideals is very real. Precisely because a history of oppression, degradation, racism has left very real consequences in its train. Precisely because there are millions of people whose lives are yet to be blessed with the riches and the potentiality that this society holds so dear. For precisely that reason, we should not go down the reparations road. Because you know what? As long as it's possible to put a color on those faces of despair that look up at us from the bottom rungs of American society, the debt will be outstanding. Let us not close the door on our national obligation the easy way. Let us not buy ourselves out of this problem with 1 year's worth of military budget expenditures. Let us not let ourselves off the hook by converting what is a sacred civic obligation, as yet unmet, into the profane currency of greenbacks. Let's be serious about dealing with our past. Let's not talk about reparations. Let's talk about justice, and let's mean it. Thank you.
The final debater on the affirmative side is Christopher Hitchens.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, I hope I can say. Comrades and friends, I might go so far. I should say first, I think it's very impressive and rather encouraging that so many people would come out on such a beautiful evening to discuss and debate such a serious and pressing subject. I should add, though, that as a teacher, I insist that anyone who has been told by their professor that they have to be here leaves now. I will not speak to captive audiences. That's good, then. All right. Further to the principles of free inquiry and open debate that go up to make a great university, my view is, and will always be, that it matters not what you think. Anyone can have thoughts. Many people content themselves with feelings. It matters how you think. So since the case has been so well phrased by my predecessor speakers, I thought I might just begin by a thought experiment, by an argument from analogy, of a case I once put myself in another context. I wrote a book saying that the British Museum should return to Athens the chunks of the sculpture of the Parthenon, sometimes called the Elgin marbles, always pronounced wrongly in this country. It was Lord Elgin, in fact, hard G, that they had annexed in the 18th century. They didn't make any sense that the sculpture should be separated. It was carved as a unity. That the original crime was the desecration of a great historic culture and a great historic temple, a gross insult to an entire culture and society, the Greeks, the amputation of an organic and aesthetic whole, a theft, a rape, a taking, perpetrated by the strong upon the weak. By the way, this was all done at the same time as the British fleet, Her Majesty's fleet, was also the military guarantor of the slave trade, of the triangular trade of the Atlantic and the Middle Passage. Now, the points I made on this, how justice could be done, how reparation could be made, how a wrong once inflicted could be restored, made good, I could well buttress by fact and could do so now if I was challenged. Additionally, I suppose most importantly, I said that while not every crime committed in the high days of empire and war and plunder could be repaired, this one could. Restitution could be made. That sculpture had been wrenched from its context. It had been broken up. It had been segregated. It had been injured. It had been damaged in the process. Not everything could be put right, but most of it could. It could be reunited. And the scars and the missing fragments and the injuries would be just part of that great narrative once the healing, once the reunification had been more or less accomplished. Now, I was fascinated. This is a simple case, as I hope you can see. I was very impressed by the torrent of bad faith in which I was immediately doused. By their arguments, ladies and gentlemen, you may know them. When people begin to introduce the irrelevant and the non sequitur and the generalization, you know you're onto something. For example, people say, do you mean that every artifact in every museum in Europe should immediately be returned to its country of origin? I think you can tell that that was not what I was saying. But could I get anyone to get off that song? I don't think I could. Do you see the analogy, perhaps, to what we're meant to discuss this evening? I think perhaps you might. There's a constant whine and drone, what I call a white whine, when this subject comes up. People say, What do you mean we'd have to go back and help the Comanches get there? You know how it goes. A rather nasty combination, actually, of self-pity and self-hatred among white Americans that deserves to be, I think, treated with great scorn. I was told, well, what about the Babylonians? I said, well, the Babylonians are not going to come and make a claim. The stuff from Babylon in the British Museum is probably best off where it is. The Rosetta Stone and the pharaonic material there is probably best off where it is. More people will see it. And there are no pharaonic Egyptians to press a claim either. Why are you mentioning this when there's a real case before you that could be made, and a real injustice that could be repaired? I think I know why. I think I feel the itchings and prickings of a bad conscience behind this kind and mode of argument. Then it was said, well, didn't the great noble Lord Elgin actually sort of rescue the sculpture by stealing it and using it first to decorate his private home and then to make a fortune by selling it? Wouldn't it have, maybe it would have been worse off if it had stayed where it was? Well, some of the sculpture that stayed in Athens was very badly treated and has been badly knocked about. And I heard it said this year in an argument about the Confederate flag, no, last year, excuse me, in an argument about the Confederate battle flag in Carolina, I heard it openly said by a spokesman for the Confederacy of our present day, one of whom is now our Attorney General. But not that he said this, but partisans of his said this. He said, well, how would those Africans have got along if we just left them in West Africa? Didn't we do them a favor? We made them Americans, didn't we? We brought them here. Do they wish they had not been removed? Now, this argument also, I think, shows a very bad conscience. Indeed, I'm going to come back to this argument, by the way. Bear it in mind. Bear in mind what the underlay of this discussion really is. But always notice and pay attention when people appear to be changing the subject and distracting or trying to redirect your attention to some theoretical or cosmic or abstract injustice that can't be rectified, that's beyond the reach of justice, that's past our power to heal or to alter. In other words, beware when someone tries to make the best the enemy of the good. This is the charge I'm going to make against the good Professor Loury, whose opening speech I thought was superb. Beware of making the best the enemy of the good. That's where I'll turn to our present case. Review it in the same way. Conduct, if you will, the same thought experiment. Was there an original traceable offense? Was there a taking, a theft, a rape, a dispossession, a confiscation? There isn't a thinking person who can say no to that. The evidence is very clear, and it mounts with every chapter of historical inquiry. Did it consist of, as I say, a confiscation? Can it therefore be made good? If not all of it can be made good, can some of it be made good? Can any of it be repaired? Don't make the best the enemy of the good. Is there anything to be rescued from this terrible story? Is there anything that can be done about it once it's been recognized? We cannot possibly undo. I actually don't think we even dare think of the scope of what it would take to imagine undoing the damage done to Africa, especially to West Africa, by the period of colonization, colonial division, plunder, slavery, and rape. We can't undo the enforced underdevelopment of Africa, though we are, you may notice, compelled to keep trying to do that on other fronts all the time and to deal with the consequences of the amputation and dismemberment of Africa in that period. And who would say we shouldn't do that, little enough as it is? Who would say it isn't our responsibility to do that in Africa now as well? I hope none of you would. We can't make up for the Middle Passage, for the uncounted millions of people who were captured and raped and tortured before they even made it across the Atlantic to be other people's property. We can't undo that, but we can refuse, we can decline to forget it. If you really want to think about all the things that can't be redeemed, you'll be in some danger, I think, of weeping. But in my hometown of Washington, D.C., there's hardly one official brick piled on another that wasn't piled there by unpaid labor under the whip. And that dead labor becomes dead capital and dead souls, dead money, and it's piled actually in the Treasury Department and the federal financial system, who took that free labor and those dead souls and turned it into capital, and it's back pay, and it's owed, and it's overdue. Now, Professor Loury, in his very indignant nobility, said that he would repudiate this cash. He'd say, keep your money, you can't buy me like that. I respect him very much for it. I hope he would say that. I would support him in saying it if he would. He can only say it for himself, it seems to me. He misses two opportunities, and I'll have to condense my remarks here. He misses the chance, a very important chance. He doesn't want us to miseducate African Americans, to feel dependent, to feel mendicant, to feel entitled. And I see why he says so. He's missing the chance to remind white society of what it does not know. He's missing a chance to challenge the complacency and the historical nullity of white society that says we don't owe anyone anything. How dare these people bring all this stuff up? It's the, it was too long ago. So when he says keep your damn money, I'm all the way with him, but he can't say keep your damn history, and let's turn that back too. This is America. The right to entitlement, to inheritance, to a share in the common treasury is what defines that. If it has to be fought for at law, so much the worse. But there's no alternative but to fight over it, and if I've done nothing else, I'm sure now every one of you knows that Lord Elgin is pronounced with a hard G. Thank you.
Well, here we are at the end of this interesting and important discussion. I'm going to urge you to move to your rights when the time comes and to vote the negative on this question. Now, we heard some arguments. We heard some red herrings. And we've heard some serious arguments. I'm going to ignore the red herrings. I'm going to ignore this business about some people say blacks might have been better off if they'd been left in West Africa. I'm going to ignore all that because nobody here is arguing anything like that. But I do want to deal with some of the more serious arguments. Mr. Hitchens suggests that I'm making the best the enemy of the good here. The good is checks could be gotten. The best is all of Loury's flowery talk about a great nation coming to realize in its practice the true meaning of its creed. That is not what I am doing at all, ladies and gentlemen. I'm engaging in hard-headed political analysis about what is the good and how can it be achieved. All right? Checks coming in the mail to some people is a good thing for those people. I'm not denying that. But there are other things that are good things too. The construction of a progressive politics in the country that can address the underlying structural problems that leave those people and others who happen not to be black disadvantaged, that's a good thing. Am I to understand that that's an unachievable ideal in American public life? That it's unimaginable that we would ever become a nation in which we understand ourselves to all be in this together, in which we understand that 3 strikes and you're out, throw them away, throw them in jail and throw the key away. Communities in which 30 or 40% of the prime age young men are in and out of prison. Understanding that is a bad thing, is a blight on our national conscience, is something that we ought not to tolerate. Am I to understand that that's unachievable? That's some ideal that's out there that can never be gotten? I think not. I think not. I'm not making the best the enemy of the good here. I'm arguing about what's the good. The race question continues to bedevil us. It's not just a matter of whether or not somebody in theory owes something. It's a matter of how we're going to work it out. The facts on the ground are constantly changing. It is not a small thing that 30 million new Americans have come to our shores since 1965. That's a big thing. What is the story of our country going to be in the 21st century? Is it about white wine? Or will it become about black people whining yet again about what they haven't gotten, about what somebody owes them? I desperately want it not to become that second thing. I'm not saying that noble, decent people who seek justice by asking for reparations are whiners and complainers. But I am saying this, there's the very real possibility that their efforts will persuade too many Americans that that's the way they need to think about black people. That would be a very bad thing. Mr. Hitchens invites us to consider an analogy. He asks us to think about what the British Museum ought to do relative to certain important artistic pieces that were taken away by bad armies from Athens. I'm inclined to agree with him. But I'm not talking about the moral relations between two nations or two peoples played out over centuries. I'm talking about the construction of political relations and national conscience within this nation, right here, right now. The analogy fails. It fails because what we Americans decide that we are about is very much in the balance here. The us-them dichotomy that I want to avoid is what we're headed for if we frame this question in terms of reparations. How can it be otherwise? You put the matter as if somebody is owed something, somebody's supposed to be paid. We're invited, and you see the students in the audience saying so. What do white people owe? What have black people been, how have black people been injured, and so forth and so on. When we put it in that way, we invite ourselves to split the polity. But it's not beyond our reach. It's not beyond our grasp. It's not outside the realm of political possibility that we might go forward as one people, one national enterprise, striving to achieve a common good, which is the obliteration of this blight from our history as it continues to manifest itself in our contemporary life. That's achievable. We can get there. The question you ought to be asking yourselves is, what path is going to get us there? Checks in the mail, or a progressive politics built around some idea about what it is that we owe to each other and what a decent society would look like? I say the latter. Ask yourself whether or not the reparations debate frames the question in a way that allows the development of a politics of decency in our society, a politics in which we look at the inner cities and we say, oh my God, how can that be happening here? A politics in which we say about those 1.2 million African-American young men who are locked up today, right now as I speak, not what manner of people are they, but what manner of people are we that we accept that kind of degradation in our midst? How are we going to get that kind of politics? How are we going to actually achieve it? In courts of law with litigants claiming about injuries done on the basis of race? I think not. I am accused of indignant nobility. Well, I'll take the nobility part, and I'll admit to a small amount of indignation. Yeah, a small amount of indignation. But not because I don't want to be sullied by having a check come in the name of Glenn Loury. That's not what this is about. No, I'm not here trying to speak on behalf of all black people. I don't want a check, therefore they shouldn't get it. I'm here trying to speak on behalf of all Americans. Let us consider how best ought we to think about the problem. What's the problem? How to think about it. What's the problem? How should we think about it? Okay. The problem is that the dark shadow of a morally problematic past continues to cast itself over the lives of too many Americans. That's the problem. If those consequences were not here, if those poverty rates weren't what they were, if the districts that are the worst places to live in this country did not tend to be black and brown, if the prisons were not overflowing with black people, if the welfare rolls weren't the color that they are, we wouldn't be talking about this. So the problem is that that history has a present-day consequence. What is the solution to that problem? Checks in the mail are not the solution. They are a good thing for as long as they last. No, I don't presume paternalism over those people who might get those checks. I don't say that they would waste their money. What I say is this is an open-ended problem here. There aren't any checks big enough to cover it. It is said that we mustn't allow the nation to forget what has happened. It has been said that the issue is an insufficient memory in the white American population about what the past had been. Precisely, I agree with that. Again, if that's the problem, what's the solution? How are we going to get people to actually acknowledge what happened in the past? Right? I say to you, as has been said from the floor, posing it as a question of reparations to be paid off is an invitation to close the door in historical memory. It's an invitation to say, once the obligation has been discharged financially, we're done with it. And there's no need to talk about what the past is. I don't want to let us off the hook that easily. It's as simple as that.